They may call themselves middle class, but they're not the middle class, they are the elite. Therefore, they are not capable of sustained political action because their every step is in a way compromised.
A lot of sociologists, political scientists, economists use the term the growing middle class of India to analyze social trends, political trends, even consumption trends, as you suggested, the consumption of luxury goods. However, you've often said that middle class does not really exist in India. Now, why do you say that?
I think the more important part about the middle class is how do we relate to one another. If, for example, people who have cars see themselves as the elite, then obviously they are not middle class. All these social definitions, whether it's capitalism, socialism, democracy, parenthood, they all depend upon social relations. I cannot call myself middle class on my own. There has to be a relationship. My relationship with the others is not a middle class relationship, it is the elite, non-elite relationship, or I might even say patron-client relationships. Which is why I hesitate to call this class a middle class, though I agree it's growing in number. But the growth is of course minuscule. So if you look at the actual numbers, they're really quite low. It is true, however, that people are beginning to aspire. If the aspiration class is the middle class, then yes, it's a big class. But if you look at middle class in terms of either consumption, which is not my favorite way of looking at it, or in terms of social relations, then a lot needs to be done.
But should middle class also not be defined in terms of occupation? Or should there be a number of criteria for judging a person whether he belongs to middle class? Occupation, as you said, relationship with people above and people below, purchasing power, and perhaps a certain coherence in the political voice of that group.
The middle class in our country, because in my view it is wanting and waiting perhaps to happen, the relationship between politicians and people, leaders and the led, is a replica of everyday life. That is, namely, it is between patron and clients. And a middle class is one when you are independent, autonomous agents. Now, if all of us, including the elite, are dependent on health and education, let us say, for starters, then right at the beginning, our wings are clipped. A middle class person should not be worried about these things, should be able to take decisions autonomously. And if you're crippled by health and education, then you can't take decisions autonomously, even though you may be rich. This chain of dependence is what I think takes our society away from moving towards a middle class society direction. A middle class society is where you and I are all autonomous, independent individuals who respect each other's space, and we abide by norms that both of us adhere to.
So basically what you're saying is that politics in India is not so much representational as it is a patron-client relationship, and those who are part of this patron-client relationship and have disproportionate access to the patronage of the state and its resources call themselves middle class.
They may not call themselves middle class, they may call themselves anything, but analysts tend to call them middle class. And that is where they make a mistake, simply because they have lifestyles that resemble the lifestyles of people in the West in terms of consumption, not in terms of social relations. And I think that is an optical illusion we should rid ourselves of.
So the middle class in Europe was associated with modernity. So you're saying that that's not the case in India?
Yeah, because in my view, modernity is not about chimney stacks, about cars, about fancy plush places. It's about social relationships. That is to say, that do people treat each other as equals at a basic level? Our relationship at one level should be that of equals. And how is that possible? It's possible if our lifestyles at base are interchangeable. How is that possible? It's possible if health and education are guaranteed. Which is why I say that in the West, middle class was a project.
What is the emergence of this kind of a privileged elite, if you don't want to call it middle class? What has it done to Indian democracy in the last 70 years?
Well, it has given India representational democracy in terms of votes. But if you look at Indian democracy in terms of interests that have to be satisfied, those interests are not being looked at all, or if looked at in a peripheral fashion. Now, what are the major interests that I'm talking about, which I believe should be looked at? Other than the health and education, I would say the informal sector. The informal sector is something that's really crippling our economic development, because when you have an informal sector, it is easy to take the alternative route out instead of going the hard way. And that again holds back a society from developing in purely industrial terms. Forget about social relationships, which obviously grow with the formalization of the industrial sector. So these are the issues which I think are very central to our society. And to the best of my knowledge, these have not been frontally addressed. If these institutions are put in place, then there'll be no need for people to look at others as patrons or as clients.
So is that what you mean by saying that the state must have a project to create a middle class? In Europe, you talked of education and health, and even social security for workers, workplace accidents, insurance, etc. All that is absent in India, and therefore you don't have middle class society, as you put it.
Yes, because you see, the three things go together: middle class, modernity, and citizenship. They're actually three faces of the same aspect, same phenomenon, three aspects of the same phenomenon. When we talk about middle class, we're looking at the economic aspect. Citizenship is the political aspect. Modernity is social relationships. And I think modernity is the motherboard. And the motherboard is when you and I can treat each other as equals at a basic level. There's a famous political philosopher called T.H. Marshall who said, citizenship confers an equality of status upon which structures of inequality are built. I think this is the best example, the best definition one can give of all three put together.
So in other words, what is holding up the emergence of a middle class society in India, as opposed to people aping consumption patterns of the West? And this is happening because the state hasn't taken up this project. Is that correct?
I would say that this project can only be done by the state, because it is a project which is massive and it must include everybody. It can't keep anybody out. A state project of this sort will not target the population, will not say this is for the poor, that's for the rich or whatever. It will say this is health for all, so that everybody feels that this is our health policy, our education policy. And when we tend to segregate the population by saying health for the poor, education for the poor, housing for the poor, then you can sort of take it for granted it will be poor health, poor housing, poor education.
Do you not see the rights-based approach that is guaranteed in our constitution to a large extent to seek basic necessities of life as part of what you have called an equalization project, what you've just been discussing, that is to end social economic disparities by the modernizing state? So do you see the right to food, right to education, right to health, right to housing, and other rights-based initiatives as part of the project to create a middle class?
I'll have to disagree with you on that, because I think these issues that you mentioned are not rights issues, they're issues of policies. Now, if I say, for example, that you have the right to health, then what kind of policy would you put in place so that I get good health? You can't tell me that there's a hospital out there which is run down and rotten. There it is, your right to health is satisfied, or your right to education is satisfied, or your right to food is satisfied. We now know carbohydrates don't make food. We need nutrients. We know the school doesn't mean a wall or a building with a roof, a wall with roofs. These are things that have to be done in terms of policies alone. Now, when we talk of rights, we again take our eyes off the ball. We are fighting about rights and we go to the courts, we go to parliament, we go to the UN. UN is full of this rights jargon. And then we satisfy ourselves and say, we've done a great job, look at the resolutions we come up with. Now, these rights resolutions, in my view, don't amount to much, because it is the actual content that matters. And when it comes to content, rights will not work, policies will work. You have to have a policy, because what is the advantage of policy? First is nitty-gritty. Number two, a policy will tell you who to hold responsible if it is not delivered. Right now, if you see a child playing in the streets and not going to school, who will you put in jail? The father, the mother, the school teacher, the district magistrate? You don't know. But if you have a policy, you know exactly who's responsible for what. So I would say that the less we talk about rights, right, let's reserve rights to very few things which are absolute, like right to life and so, absolute. You can't, juggle around with those. Everything else, or most of everything else, should be in terms of policy.
Okay, let me ask you a slightly different question. These people in India who call themselves the middle class, however inappropriate that definition or descriptor might be, are they capable of sustained political action and leadership?
No, they're not. They may call themselves middle class, but they're not the middle class, they are the elite. Therefore, they are not capable of sustained political action because their every step is in a way compromised. For example, if you ask them about health policy, they will not talk to you about universal health. They will think of better ways of being more elitist in health, elitist in education. You might even say that some of those who are not in the so-called middle class bracket have been sucked into that trap. For example, this 25% quota for economically weaker section in private schools. What does it mean? It just means you're letting public schools rot. You're taking, again, kids out from the poorer classes and putting them in private schools, and they begin to feel beholden to you. Again, it's a kind of patron client. Now, as we know in France, the best schools are government schools. The best universities are government universities. The best hospitals are government hospitals. If you have a minor problem like a itching ear or ingrown toenail, you go to a private doctor. Otherwise, in France, for anything major, you go to a public hospital. But here, if the elite is in charge, and because of our relationship, you see, I'll give you a very simple example which happens every day. We are served by people at home. They live with us, they stay with us. But do we know them? We don't know them. They lead completely different lives. We don't know what makes them laugh, what makes them cry. We have no idea. And neither do they know what makes us laugh or cry. So we are two different worlds living in the same house. And which is why I say that social relationship is most important. If I can talk to you as an equal without being you, but you understanding me, I understanding you up to a certain degree, that is what makes for modernity, middle class, citizenship, all of them.
Do you see political attempts such as the Anna Hazare movement, the protests for in the Nirbhaya rape case, justice for Jessica Lal, etc. Are these movements aimed at demanding that the state be more transparent and accountable, or are they nascent movements for seminal social and political change?
I think they are stopgap movements. When issues sort of boil over, then you have these uprisings. They don't have a long-term perspective. And Anna Hazare movement is a very good example of that. Their most attractive part of their charter was the citizenship charter. And they let that lapse. That was what was really interesting in that entire thing. But at the same time, the larger issues of social dynamism, uplift of the entire society in terms of citizenship, those things are not really attended to. What was attended to was that things are wrong in some places, let's correct them. True, the bureaucracy is, not the way it should be. So let's correct the bureaucracy. But what do you do about informal labor? What do you do about health? What do you do about housing? They have nothing to say. So I would argue that these movements are symptomatic of problems, and they are, stopgap or band-aid or whatever you may call it. But if you're thinking in terms of building a citizenship, then it has to be more than just display of anger.
You seem to be suggesting that this middle class can never speak of either the less privileged than them, nor can it do anything for them, nor does it want to do anything for them. It can only speak for itself and its own interests. But if that were true, then how is it that a number of revolutionary movements, including India's freedom movement, were actually led by people who came from the middle classes?
This is what falls in line with my other thesis. That is, if you're thinking of any change, social change, then for that social change you need elite. And elite are people who are in a sense classless. They sever the ties from their class background and class moorings. And some of the most interesting things that happened in Europe in terms of making citizenship were led by people who were elite. I mean, this is a difficult thing to say in terms of today's political correctness, but they were not the masses. The masses didn't even lead the Anti-Child Labor Act. It was the elite again. The elite there's always a category that is a mobile category which is highly dynamic, but you cannot say sociologically when it will kick in.
But is it an economic elite or a political elite?
It's an elite that is, it's a political elite at the end of the day, but they are economically not dependent on anybody. If the suffragette movement, the leaders of the suffragette movement, the major leaders, were women of substance. They're all people of certain, substance. They may not be the ultra rich, but they are not badly off.
That's true of Indian freedom movement also.
Exactly.
Now, you've described the Indian middle class, coming back to the middle class, as a sickly middle class category. Now, is it possible that in their search for a root, in the search to be anchored, these are the people who are prone to authoritarian politics, authoritarian and obscurantist ideologies, because they give them a sense of history, of a glorious past, best science, best mathematics, best Pushpak Viman's best plastic surgery, best literature, better than everybody else in the world. And is that happening in India?
Well, this rootlessness is a problem for two reasons. One is, of course, the difference between the well-to-do and the rest. It's a huge gap. It's not a minor gap. Say between people like us, who are, you might say, middle class, I would say elite. We employ people, who earn 15 or 16,000 rupees a month, and whom some others call middle class wrongly because they have a television at home. So you can imagine that even in our homes, which is so ordinary by some standards, we have a vast gap. So that is there. The second thing is about the rootlessness is that if there's such a vast gap, then obviously we have different routes. I have one set of routes, that other person has another set of routes. Then, to complicate matters further, you have the transition today from rural to urban. This transition is very interesting, the urbanization, the migration. Oh yes, not just rural to urban, but even rural to rural. And why is rural to rural happening? Because many industrial and informal sector units and outfits are in other rural areas. All of us are going through a churn at the moment. And because we are going through a churn, we need support. Human beings always need support. The way in which support was provided in the West is through social insurance. We need support. Where do we get the support from? From family, from kin, from caste, from clan. That is our support base. So when your driver says that he has to go home because his third cousin is getting married, you laugh at him. So what's your problem? He said, no, that's very important. Yes, it is important because that's his social insurance.
How does all this reflect in the politics of this middle class?
The politics of the middle class is all about how can we do something that helps ourselves. Now in doing that, they need the help of the large number of voters. So the policies they put forward are not policies which are people oriented, socially oriented. Policies are largely towards themselves.
How do they end up supporting authoritarian politics and a politics that glorifies the past rather than something that promises a modernity?
This is something which actually afflicts everybody in our country. This rootlessness is not something which affects only a small section. Look at the movement that takes place. And this rootlessness is you might say, not a generic phenomenon, that we are wrong, we use the term, but it's a highly general phenomenon. It's sort of spread out. And because it is spread out, the search for roots is not only amongst the so-called elite and privileged, it is across the board, the search for roots. Number two, it is also not a phase that stays permanently. There are ups and downs in this. So when you're on the up phase, you say we are all sold out to a certain political system. But then it goes through its, difficult periods too. But these things happen over 15 years, 20 years, and therefore we tend to see things as static. A little long view will give you the variations. You're absolutely right. Rootlessness, or the sense of rootlessness, makes people want to belong. They may not want just belonging to be translated into political terms all the time. But in everyday social life, going to temples, going to Jagran manchas, going to satsangs, these are all ways of trying to find some kind of community. You see, Hinduism is a very strange religion. Here, there's nothing that two Hindus can do that one Hindu cannot, which is unlike other major religions like Christianity and Islam, where you have to come together. There's a congregation. The congregation is where the actual prayers happen. And even among the Sikhs, they say, when you're together in the Sangat, that is the temple, right? But Hinduism, you can build your own temple, you can build your own house, you can have your own guru, you can have a designer guru actually, made to specifications. And that is why Hindus need to belong somewhere, especially when they leave the village. In the village, they belong, When they move out, they need to belong. So that belongingness is much more genuine.
Belongingness is sought in terms of relationships as well as in terms of an ideology of imagining a past?
As an anthropologist, I can tell you that this is a human feeling across the world. I have seen and read about, let's say, those in Kalahari Desert in South Africa. They're supposed to be Stone Age people. Nobody is Stone Age actually, but they believe that they are the most superior. Their culture is the best. The Kachins of Burma live with the Shans of Burma, but they think the Shans are not quite evolved. The Chinese, Middle Kingdom, India, this idea that I am number one and others are number two is an anthropological failing across humankind. The idea of citizenship is to combat this. Citizenship is challenged because citizenship is not natural. Citizenship is very artificial and very contrived. What is natural is to say, I am better than you. And this you see in caste, for example. There's no single caste in this country that says I'm number 2. Not a single. They all say I'm number 1 and then 2, 3, 4, 5. And citizenship's job is to say that we are all equal, which is why it is so difficult and it always slips. The moment you take, your attention is taken away, boom, you fall.